Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. So today we're going to learn new chapter, that is chapter 4, Analyzing Investing Activities. So in this chapter 4, we're going to learn 5 subtopics, that is introduction to current asset, introduction to inventories, introduction to long-term asset, plant asset and natural resources, last but not least, the intangible asset. Okay. So now let's go to the first subtopic, that is introduction to current asset. What is asset? Assets are resources controlled or owned by the business entity. An asset can be classified into non-current asset and current asset. And for non-current asset consists of tangible asset, intangible asset, and investment. Whereas for the current asset, it consists of cash and other assets that are convertible to cash, usually within the operating cycle of the company. Okay, so I harap you faham lah what's the definition of current asset. So now kita akan tengok kepada apa itu operating cycle. Okay. So operating cycle is the amount of time from the commitment of cash for purchases until the collection of cash resulting from sales of goods and or services. This operating cycle is a process of converting cash into short-term assets and back into cash. Short-term asset to back into cash. Okay. So cash is represent the starting point and the end point. So operating cycle is used to classify assets and liabilities as either current or non-current. Okay. So contoh kat sini cash. So you boleh je purchase secara credit kan, so akan adanya account payable kat sini, so is your liability, and the inventory is your asset. So sebab tu dia kata boleh classify into either asset and liability. So sekarang ni current and non-current pula. This account payable is your current liability, inventory is your current asset. Dia boleh juga jadi you purchase the machinery is the non-current asset. Okay, purchase, and then machinery itu akan digunakan untuk inventory itu untuk produce. Okay. Itulah. So, the excess of current assets over current liabilities is called working capital. So, setiap company, they wish to have the working capital. They wish their current asset is higher than their current liabilities. Nevertheless, this working capital is costly. Therefore, most of the companies focus on to improve their profitability and cash flow. Okay, so they focus to improve their profit dan juga improve their cash flow. So how are they going to improve their profitability and cash flow? That is by reducing the investment in current asset. So untuk reduce the investment in current asset, so company boleh do all these 3 things. First, kena ada effective credit unreturn. Apa itu effective credit unreturn? Dia digunakan to assess the credit worthiness. So maksudnya untuk improve dia punya collection for account receivable lah. Okay, dia nak dapat duit secara banyak, so dia kenalah tengok customer dia punya credit worthiness. Boleh tak your customer beli secara credit. Okay, so next, company can do the just-in-time inventory management. Maksudnya dia tak pegang stok. Bila orang order baru dia buat, and then terus dia dapat cash. So that's going to reduce lah dia punya investment dalam current asset. Okay, CIP. So next, finance the current asset through the current liability. So bila dia buat ni, dia pun dapat reduce the investment in current asset, and that's how company going to improve their profitability and cash flow. So now let's go to the classification of current asset. Okay, current asset can be classified into cash and cash equivalent, receivable, and prepaid expenses. So let's go to the 1.1, that is cash, cash equivalents, and liquidity. So cash, what is cash? Cash is the currency, coins, and amounts on deposit in bank accounts and some savings accounts. Cash is the most liquid asset. Okay. So now let's go to the cash equivalents. Cash equivalent is highly liquid. It's a short-term investment that are readily convertible to a known cash amount and close to maturity dates. Usually cash equivalent ni less than 3 months lah dia punya maturity dates. And it's not sensitive to interest rate changes. So these are the dia punya characteristic lah of cash equivalent. Okay. So example of cash equivalents are short-term treasury bills, commercial paper, and money market funds. So now kita tengok apa itu liquidity. Okay, sebab kita cakap kan tadi cash ni is the most liquid. So apa itu liquid? Okay, cash equivalent highly liquid. Okay, so now what is liquidity? Liquidity is the amount of cash or cash equivalents the company has on hand and the amount of cash it can raise in a short period of time. Maksudnya apa-apa je lah amount yang dia ada, yang company ada tu, untuk dikonvertkan kepada cash dalam jangka masa yang singkat. That is liquidity. Okay, so it relates to the ability of a company to meet its obligation. Itulah obligation, maksudnya apa-apa yang dia perlu bayar, so dia perlukan cash dengan keadaan segera. So that's why kita perlu tahu apakah liquid asset. So there are several steps, but I'm focused on 2 steps to increase the liquidity. First is billing your clients properly and that you are receiving prompt payments. Sebab tu it's very important for you to have the credit worthiness. Okay, untuk you review you punya customer punya credit worthiness. Sebab nanti dia akan affect the payment lah. So bila you dapat prompt payment, you punya account receivable tu liquid lah, boleh terus di-convert kepada cash. Second, negotiate longer payment terms with your vendors. Bila you negotiate, maksudnya you nak bayar, you tak bayar another 5 months, so macam you boleh pegang you punya liquid asset, cash tu lama. So sebab tu dengan 2 cara ni dia dapat increasekan you punya liquidity. Okay, so now let's go to the 1.2, that is receivable. So what are receivable? Receivables are amounts due from others that arise from the sale of goods or services or the loaning of money. Okay, that is receivable. So now kita pergi lagi kepada account receivable. Account receivable is referred to promises of indebtedness due from customer. And what is notes receivable? Notes receivable refer to former written promises of indebtedness due. Okay, maksud dia. So now let's go to the valuation of receivable. Macam mana kita nak value kita punya receivable? Receivable are reported at their net realizable value. That is the total amount of receivables less an allowance for uncollectible accounts. Okay, so kalau macam kita masukkan dalam SOFP, kita punya receivable tu kita akan tolakkan dulu dengan AFDD. Baru amount tu kita akan record sebagai receivable. Okay, itulah net realizable value. So management estimates the allowance for uncollectibles based on experience, customer fortunes, economy and industry expectations, and collection policies. Ni FDD kan berdasarkan management punya judgement. So dia nak buat judgement tu, dia buat estimation tu, dia berdasarkan 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 factor ni lah. Okay, so now kita nak analyze receivable. So we're going to analyze the receivable in 3 components that are collection risk, authenticity of receivables, And lastly is the securitization of receivable. Kenapa kita perlu analyse? Sebab adanya estimation tadi. Bila adanya estimation tadi, it will lead to some risks and errors. That's why kita kena buat this analyze the receivable. Analyzing the receivable. Okay. So receivable should be analysed to properly manage cash flow and to identify problematic areas. Sebab kalau kita salah estimate, management salah buat estimation, dia akan jejaskan you punya cash flow. Okay. So first, collection risk. Collection risk is used to review allowance for uncollectible. By macam mana dia nak review allowance for uncollectible ni? First, dia can determine the competitor's receivable as a percent of sales. Macam you buat common ratio tu lah. Okay. Bila you dah membuat dalam persen, barulah you boleh compare. You punya comparable tu lagi efektif, lagi meaningful lah as you compare daripada segi figure saja. Okay. So next, dia kena examine the customer concentration. Risk increases when receivables are concentrated in one or a few customer. So maksudnya kat sini, concentration tu sendiri membawa maksud kepada debtor concentration is refer to the percentage amount of accounts receivable owed by a single debtor. If you do business with only one customer, your debtor concentration is 100%. If a single debtor of accounts for 1/3 of your total account receivable, your concentration with that debtor is 33%. So typically, a higher debtor concentration means a less diversified customer portfolio and an increased financing risk. So bila maksud dia kata risk increase when receivable are concentrated, maksud concentrated ni, let's say contohnya you ada satu saja customer account receivable. So kalau you ada satu, maksudnya it is very concentrated. So kalau macam contoh dia tu tak nak bayar langsung hutang, then you punya risk 100% lah. That's why kita kena diversify. Kita kena ada banyak lah kita punya account receivable. So next, investigating the age pattern of receivable. Kita kena tengoklah sama ada account receivable kita ni, customer kita selalu overdue ke, ataupun berapa lama dia masa untuk bayar. So kita daripada pattern dia bayar tu, kita boleh agak lah dia punya collection risk higher or lower. Next, determine portion of receivable that is renewal of prior receivable. So this is how we're going to analyze the collection risk. So next we're going to take a look at the authenticity of receivable. The description of receivable in financial statements or notes is usually insufficient to provide reliable clues as to whether receivables are genuine, due, and enforceable. So one factor affecting authenticity is the right of merchandise return. Therefore, we need to review the credit policy for changes, review the return policy for changes, as well as review any contingencies on receivable. So that's how we're going to analyze the authenticity of receivable. So next is the securitization or factoring. So securitization or factoring is when a company sells all or a portion of its receivable to a third party. Receivable can be sold with or without recourse to a buyer. So recourse here is referring to the guarantee of collectibility. Sale of receivable with recourse do not effectively transfer risk of ownership. So for securitization with any type of recourse, the seller must record both an asset and a compensating liability for the amount factored. Whereas for securitization without any recourse, the seller removed the receivable from the balance sheets. Receivable securitization is a well-established funding method, whereby assets such as trade receivable, credit card receivable, or other financial assets are packaged, underwritten, and sold in the capital markets in the form of asset backup securities. So kat sini kita menjual kita punya account receivable kepada third party, iaitu bank ke. Okay, so itu ialah funding method lah. Kita dapat duit daripada menjual kita punya account receivable. So now we're going to take a look at the one pointer, that is prepaid expenses. Prepaid expenses are advance payments for services or goods not yet received that extend beyond the current accounting periods. For examples, advance payments for rents, insurance, utilities, and property taxes. So all these prepaid expenses will be classified under current asset. So these are the introduction for current assets.